And we're on.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending our third Future Insights talk on the creative economies. I am Gwen Work and I serve as the Director of Community and Creative Work here at the American Craft Council. I'd like to thank everyone who made this talk possible, the guest presenters for today, the American Craft Council staff who's been amazing in supporting me and getting these talks produced as well as marketed, the Wingate Charitable Foundation, and of course, you all, the attendees, as this talk will also rely on your input and conversations as well. ACC recognizes and acknowledges the traumas of institutional and structural racism and exclusionary practices in the craft sector and is committed to working toward a more inclusive, just, and equitable world. ACC is committed to amplifying and telling more inclusive narratives that reflect the diverse cultural and social makeup of America. Our headquarters are located in Minneapolis, Minnesota, residing on the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of the Dakota people, the land ceded in the treaties of 1837 and 1851, and land partitioned by Pierre Bottineau, the son of an Ojibwe woman and a French voyager in the 19th century. The Minneapolis-St. Paul metropolitan area is home to one of the largest and most tribally diverse urban American Indian populations, numbering well over 35,000. The Native community of Minneapolis is comprised of many nations, the largest being the Dakota, whose cultural history begins at the confluence of the Minnesota and the Mississippi rivers, a sacred place they call the Bedote, and the Ojibwe, whose homeland extend north from the city. ACC resides in the land that was cared for and called home by the Ojibwe people, before them the Dakota and the Northern Cheyenne people, and other Native peoples from time immemorial. This land holds great historical, spiritual, and personal significance for its original stewards, the Native nations and the people of this region. We recognize and continually support and advocate for the sovereignty of the Native nations in this territory and beyond. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm tribal sovereignty and will work to hold the American Craft Council accountable to American Indian peoples and its nations. The American Craft Council connects and galvanizes diverse craft communities to advance craft's impact in contemporary American life. ACC's initiatives have evolved over time and through the pandemic. There are 4 pillars that frame our strategies. Public Voices for Craft, where we serve as the nexus of information, content producer, and the national network building broader audiences who participate in and support craft. Stewardship and Legacy, where we document and preserve generational knowledge and support new research and scholarship in the field. Creative Economies, where we invest in makers and their entrepreneurial efforts so they can fully live creative and sustainable lives. And Social Impact and Community, investing in and supporting in the diverse ways that craft impacts communities and culture, the humanity it evokes, and the future it is creating. The exhibition, Crafting America, curated by Jen Paget, Associate Curator at the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art, and Glenn Adamson, Guest Curator and Scholar, defines on their walls what is craft. The term is defined by them as craft is a simple or complex as you want to make it. In its essence, craft is skilled making on a human scale. For the sake of these conversations, we will be discussing craft with this definition in mind. Future Insights are interactive talks with the audience and are to initiate conversations around specific topics, allowing the craft community to both learn from others and ideate ways ACC and other craft-focused organizations can support makers as we strive to understand a post-pandemic world, create equity in the field, and understand the new economy. Future Insight talks allow us to listen to craft communities and their needs, develop solutions, and implement and innovate new ideas for support. Through these talks, we hope to understand what a healthy craft ecology looks like and how this ecology can thrive. Today's talk is the future of creative economies. We will feature a variety of individuals who are passionate about empowering artists to thrive and build economies around creativity. The creative economy fosters entrepreneurs and cultural industries that generate jobs and income, spin off new products and services, and attract and retain unrelated businesses and skilled workers. Together, creative placemaking's livability and creative economic development outcomes have the potential to radically change the future of Americans' towns and cities. After 22 months of pandemic-induced lockdowns, there couldn't be a better time to appreciate the creative economy. The United Nations did just that as it marked the year 2021 as the International Year of the Creative Economy for Sustainable Development. Today's presenters are Melanie Barnett from the Black Artists and Designers Guild, Leslie Roberts, the Executive Director of Textile Arts Los Angeles, myself, Caroline Taiwao, who is the Director of Economic Opportunity at Springboard for the Arts, and Eric Takashita, who is Americans for the Arts, has worked with Creative Workers Working, Creative Placemaking, and a Creative Economy Consultants. We will hear individually from each of these presenters and then engage in a group informal conversation. After about 20 minutes of the group conversation, we will then move into breakout rooms with each presenter leading the conversation. And you as the attendees can ask questions, make comments, or share your thoughts with the presenter leading your room. Notes will be taken in each room and shared along with the recording after the conclusion of the talk. So our first presenter is Melanie Barnett. So Melanie, if you would please turn your camera on.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Gwen, for having me today.
You're welcome. It's nice to have you. Thank you for being here. Melanie is an artist, entrepreneur, and authority on cultural traditions and practices of art in the African diaspora and how it translates into her vision of the modern Black experience. From her sculptural ceramic tiles and vessels to mixed media paintings to handwoven rugs, Melanie continues to evolve her craft and share her African heritage with a global audience. Using natural materials like the finest wools, silks, pastels, and clay, she uncovers a deeper language of her legacy and authentic understanding of her cultural identity. A passionate connector and an expert ambassador, her mission is to use art as a tool to create community impact and open doors for the next generation of Black artists and expand the conversation around marginalization in the arts and create greater opportunities for inclusion. As the founder of the Black Artists and Designers Guild, a global platform and curated collective of independent Black artists, makers, and designers, she is always seeking new ways to define the Black narrative and experience for a new generation while bringing awareness to inequality. She also is on the board of Surf Plus, an organization that provides emergency loans to artisans and craftspeople during natural disasters. Equal parts artist, anthropologist, and activist, she hopes to bridge a function of textiles and ceramics from the African region by exploring what it means to be Black in America today. Her work has been praised in Interior Design Magazine, New York Magazine, Traditional Home, Elle Decor, HGTV Magazine, Luxe and Design Magazine, and House Beautiful. She was also on the cover of Brownstoner Magazine and Wendy Goodman's Designer Lives video series with New York Magazine's The Cut. Her entrepreneurial spirit was captured in the New York Times bestselling book In the Company of Women and Home by Higgy and West. She appeared as a guest speaker on Morning Joe, MSNBC Your Business, and TEDx. Melanie's clients include Marriott, Viacom, Saks, WeWork, Avalon Communities, and MetLife Building. In 2019, she was awarded Designer of the Year by Interiors and Sources Magazine and the Real Estate Architecture and Design Development Award from brownstoner.com. She is a sought-after speaker and has done engagements and keynotes for KBIS, the D&D Building, United Nations, the Affordable Art Fair, and many others. Melanie is based in Brooklyn, New York, and is available for collaborations, public speaking, and business leadership projects. Wow, Melanie, we are just so excited and fortunate to have you here. So thank you for being here today.
Thanks again for having me. I feel like I don't even need to do an introduction now. Well, thanks everybody for joining us today. I'll start with a brief presentation about who I am, a little bit about my work, and the community work around the Black Artists and Designers Guild. So the next slide. So I just want to give you a little bit about my work. I am an artist, a multidisciplinary artist. These are some of my tapestry weavings, portraits of family members. I've been really doing a lot of exploring about what does the African-American experience look like through a Caribbean diaspora lens. I am a first generation born here in the US from a mother from St. Vincent in the Caribbean and a father from Jamaica. And I've been really looking at different patterns of migration, memories, and what does it feel like to be a person of the Black diaspora. Next slide, please. My work also straddles between design and art. And so I have a wallpaper collection with Lulu in Georgia, all based on different practices, Black cultural practices specifically, that are pertain to pottery, as well as different ceremonies, looking at the different Black cultural traditions and how do we bring those elements in the home. Next slide. And so my work with the Black Artists and Designers Guild, as Gwen said, I'm the founder, and I started the Guild in 2018 on a mission where we aim to advance the community of Black makers. We are also looking to create equitable and inclusive spaces, and we invest in our ancestral futures. And we're a community of Black artists and designers throughout the diaspora, and so that means that we're located all over the world. Majority of our members are in the US, but we also have members in the Caribbean, West Africa, and Europe. Next slide. The purpose of the Guild was really about creating a liberatory space so we could create our own projects, think about what does it mean to design around Black life. And this was one of our inaugural legacy projects called Obsidian, where we designed a virtual concept house, really catering to Black families and the wellness, looking at technology, looking at sustainability. And 23 of our creators from the Guild designed the space. And it's on a virtual website that you could go to our website and you could experience what this virtual concept house is like. Next slide. In addition, we really look to create experimental spaces in different settings. This was a recent project called Blackifage at Design Miami in partnership with AIG Group. Layden Lewis and Danielle Fenoy designed the space on behalf of Badge, really exploring what Black identity, creativity, and expression can be. And so we created a space where once you walked in, people would have to contemplate and think about what does that actually mean. And so this is one of the ways that we exercise our liberatory in design in creating spaces for the community to really think about some of the things that we're thinking about when it comes to Black bodies in space and creativity. Next slide. In addition, we also exhibit at different shows where we exhibit as a collective. It's quite different than exhibiting as an individual artist, but what the Guild has been able to provide are opportunities for our members to have exposure to audiences that they may not have had before or weren't in a position where they felt that they could. And this was a show called Texas Contemporary. This happened before COVID, and but we exhibited at a group and pretty much our booth sold out, which was a really wonderful experience for us. Next slide. And I'll end here, and just to share, this is another woven tapestry of one of my works, and then the contact information to learn more about my work as well as the Guild. And I look forward to having a deeper conversation in our breakout groups. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. That was wonderful. And you'll appear in my presentation as well, because you've been doing some work with the American Craft Council on a variety of projects. So thank you for that. All right.
Gwen,
Next,
could you?
yeah. Next, I would love to ask Leslie to please turn on her camera. Great. So Leslie Roberts is the executive director and the co-founder of Textile Arts LA. She is also the principal of Ocean Park Studio, a marketing and strategy firm that believes in the power of thoughtful ideas, creative vision, and clarity of purpose to achieve meaningful change and growth. Leslie received a BFA in art history from UCLA and a certificate from UCLA Anderson School Executive Education Program. One of her earliest memories was seeing a Robert Rauschenberg Gemini GEL exhibition at the Smithsonian American Art Museum. She is a strategist, community builder, and social entrepreneur. Leslie is also the lead for the Southern California Fiber Shed and a member of Art Table, Textile Society of America, American Craft Council, Fiber Art Now, and the Surface Design Association. So Leslie, welcome. Thank you for being here today.
Gwen, thank you very, very much for having me. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. And I have a few slides. So first of all, I'd like to say that I am speaking to you from the unceded ancestral and traditional lands of the Tongva and the Gabrielino here in the Los Angeles Basin. And one of the other things that I've been thinking about is how I can take that sort of land acknowledgement and transition it into something not just performative, but action oriented. And I've discovered this group called Redbud Resource. And so I just wanted to give them a shout out because maybe they can help all of us with how we continue to move that part of the story forward. Gwen did a brilliant job of introducing me. I think that having a sense of context on someone's background and understanding their experience and their breadth helps you know what perspective they take towards the work that they do. And for instance, for me, I have a solid background in business, but what I'm interested in is talking about sort of the fact that what I'm working on with Textile Arts LA and what our community is working on is very much a work in progress and very much a way of acting within this new economy as if it's a practice for ourselves also. So what I thought I would do is walk through my background, research, application, and then outcomes, and cover this ground around a new way of thinking about the way that we live in the world, how we apply courage, right? What does it take to function in the world that we find ourselves in? Agency, which is our empowerment, and then this idea of enchantment, which could also be considered a new creative economy. And so specifically Textile Arts Los Angeles, the name can tell you a lot about what we do, but I really wanted to draw attention to the inclusivity of the kinds of titles and the kinds of industry that we incorporate or we embrace in our organization, because I think that it says a lot, not just about our genre or our medium, but also about how we embrace this broader community so that we can be vital and robust from an economic standpoint, right? How do we enlarge in the tent? And I'll come back to why we think this is relevant to our economy in a moment. And then here's a list of the programming that we do, right? So we have a textile month, we do talks, we do activities that are around inspiration and technique building. And I think it's critical to know that we are just about working on 5 years old. We have 200 members. And I think, again, that that's really critical when you imagine that Textile Arts Los Angeles is in a city of 17 million, right? So what does it mean to have 200 people actively engaged with us so far? So I want to talk a little bit about this idea of the moments in your life that become apocryphal, right? And this particular story that I'd like to share is a bit of an existential touchstone. So when I was in the second grade, my mother came home from work and I handed her my report card. And I said, "Hey, Mom, Jenny's parents give her $1 for every A she gets." And my mother doesn't even look up and she says, "That's nice. You get A's because you can." And the story stuck with me because it's not about me, right? It's about how we determine our intrinsic versus our extrinsic values, right? Who are we? What is it that we want to bring into the world, not because we're being externally rewarded, but because it's part of our deep humanity, right? Who are we and what do we want our lives to feel like? And so this particular story, again, informs where I'm going. So number one, I think that all of us are living within a world that is fundamentally changing, right? The rules that we thought determined our economic environment, our social environment, the environment itself, they're radically changing. And in addition to that, there's this idea of courage and the idea of sitting carefully within this space of the not knowing. And I think that being comfortable within that not knowing and being comfortable in this moment of transformative change, and whether it's Melanie's work, where she's bringing, Black artists and designers to the forefront, or Caroline's or Eric's that we'll hear about next. It's the idea that we're all living ourselves towards a new way of being. And that Toni Morrison, of course, reminds us of our agency within this work, right? That we, in the choices that we make within our economic selves, as well as social and whatnot, we have to make choices that are worth the sacred lives that we're leading. And that craft itself is really a deep and inextricably yummy place to explore that, because it is tied up with the genesis of industrialization, capitalism, labor exploitation, all of the things that inform the way that we function in the economy at the moment. And in just a bit, I'll tie this back in specifically to what Textile Arts LA does. But I bring in this idea too, because again, craft is a very particular space in which we can explore these ideas around what is actually critical to the way that we engage with the world. And of course, the idea that money itself is, it's a currency, right? It's a current. It's the energy that makes things possible. So it's not specifically money as the object that we're after. It's after what money can do for us, right? Safety, shelter, food, respect, power. And so if we think about that as energy rather than concreteness, then we can think about what are all of the different ways in which we can engage ourselves in the social and economic worlds that we live in, so that we can create what we want from different kinds of relationships. And so one of the things that we play with in Textile Arts LA is this idea of the third thing, right? Who else can we bring into the room? What else can we do? Where else can we do it? All of these other things that enable us to expand the possibilities. So there are a couple of other books in this background that influence our philosophy and how we want to be in the world, right? And I think many of you probably know about The Gift, but it's just this reminder again that when we're talking about art or craft or the things that we're making, their power and their value sort of transcends their commoditization, right? There's a magic within that. And then there's a wonderful book by Simon Sinek that just reminds us that what we're truly engaged in our lives is this idea of the infinite game, Okay, so it's not about the specificity of who's working with us at the moment or what rules we're working under, right? Because COVID might hit. It's in how do we keep adapting and changing and keeping this game alive. And then, of course, there's the fabulous Adrienne Marie Brown, who emergent strategy really ties a lot of these themes together. How do we think about the way that we see and feel the world and each other? And then how can we think about our work as a practice ground for transforming? So to go back to the idea of you get A's because you can, it's what is my purpose? What is my co-founder Carrie Burkle's purpose, right? What are we building with this organization that we have? And so one of the things that we want to double down on is this idea of a paradigm shift. What does the organization exist for? And how does it create movement? And part of that is this idea that our economy, our craft economy, is like anything else with our citizenship, our humanity, right? We have to put our own skin in the game. There is no they out there that's making things happen. And so a lot of that is a consciousness about where do I spend my money? Where do I spend my time? So we're 4.5 years old. 2 of those years have been spent in a pandemic, okay? Our revenue is entirely membership-based and programming-based. So our membership is sliding scale, which means we don't ask questions. We allow people to meet us where they are. And then, as you can imagine, in the last few years, our programming has really taken a hit. Not only do most people want to engage in person, but there's also this challenge of a lot of competition from other much larger and more established organizations doing programming for free as a way of keeping us all engaged, right? But changing the game for those of us who are raising money by earning money through programming. So the first idea of our future is the idea of collective activism, right? We are entirely funded and supported by our members. Whether they know this overtly, they certainly know it through our efforts transparently. We exist because of them. That is where all of our funding comes from. It allows us to double down on this idea that we do have agency in the world, that what we do matters, and that we are positively affecting the quality of life of our members. So not only through the programming that we do, a workshop, an opportunity for them to teach, an opportunity for them to learn, an opportunity for them to exhibit, but we create a platform in which they also have an opportunity to meet each other. And we consistently hear anecdotes of them partnering and creating further economic opportunity, right? So we become an engine or an organizing platform, and then the system itself continues to generate opportunity. It's also an idea of being comfortable with reinvention, right? This entire thing is an improvisation. We can have a business plan. We can all think that we can see the future, but what we fundamentally have to do is improvise within what's offered to us, adapt to a pandemic, adapt to a new competitor, and to continue to have the fortitude, right? So to go back to the infinite game, can we keep playing? So again, we look for opportunity to share what we know, and to give each other credit so that this organization is truly a community. So we think about where our worldview, so our paradigm, meets our courage, and then designs towards agency, our capacity for living well and doing well. And I think that somewhere farther along as we keep talking is where we can go deeply into sort of some of how this manifests. But I hope that offers a background on who we are and the way that we think. And I'm really excited to have this conversation. Thank you for having me as a part.
Thank you, Leslie. Really appreciate that. And it's great to get to know a little bit more about the Textile Art LA, and looking forward to having further conversation with you a little bit later today. All right. While this may be a little weird and awkward, I'm going to introduce myself. As mentioned earlier, I am Gwen Work Smith, and I specialize in craft entrepreneurship and creative economies, working at the intersection of craft and entrepreneurship. I work with both rural and urban communities, teaching professional development and creative entrepreneurship workshops across the country over the last 22 years. I believe in helping artists and small business owners expand their markets and create sustainable, thriving businesses, and in the power of a strong craft economy. I currently serve as the Director of Community and Creative Work at the American Craft Council, as a desired brand effect coach for Flourish and Thrive Academy, and the Craft Your Commerce Program Director at Mountain BizWorks located in Asheville, North Carolina. I'm also the board chair for the North Carolina Glass Center. I live in Asheville, North Carolina with my jeweler husband and 3 dogs. All right. Thanks, Jason. So I currently reside in Asheville, North Carolina, and I want to recognize that it is on the unceded lands of the eastern band of the Cherokee Nation. While ACC offers a variety of marketplaces, both in person and digital, along with some additional related programming that contributes to the work we do around the creative economy, today I'm actually going to be focusing and presenting on projects that were developed and launched in 2021 and focused around what we call the Artist Support Initiative. ACC was able to innovate in the face of uncertainty and respond to the changing needs of our craft community. In today's rapidly changing world, we asked our community questions like, how will craft artists make a living moving forward? Will the marketplace look the same or change? Will academic educational programs close? How will craft artists survive in a post-pandemic world? And from these conversations, the idea of the Artist Support Initiative developed. The ASI is a new initiative from the American Craft Council that will work to expand craft economies, build communities, and create a resilient craft ecology by addressing these questions and more. The Artist Support Initiative is a place to study and to understand how people and materials of craft relate to each other, their environment, and with the goal of creating new innovative programs to support and serve craft artists and the creative economy. At the Artist Support Initiative, we make space for experimentation, innovation, and education. Next slide. Some of the new Artist Support Initiative programs that we launched in 2021 that I'll be presenting on today include the Emerging Artist Cohort, the Object As, and Future Insight projects. Next slide. The Emerging Artist Cohort was a 3-month pilot program that cultivated the next step for independent craft artists to advance their professional careers. The program supports 13 innovative artists new to their careers who expand craft boundaries and challenge us to new perspectives. Through facilitated workshops, presentations, and conversations, participating artists were able to gain a deeper understanding of their professional skills and opportunities that will help them diversify their income streams and thrive in their chosen career paths. Participating artists were able to connect with established industry leaders from a variety of craft sectors, including gallerists, curators, marketplace artists, exhibiting artists, social practice artists, designers, and more. Next slide. Some details of the current Emerging Artist Cohort is that there were 13 artists chosen for the pilot program. 86% of them identify as BIPOC and or LGBTQIA+. They all just finished a 12-week intensive that went from July 9th through September 28th. And they focused on pathways like exhibiting artists, social impact and community engagement, and studio and marketplace. They also participated in workshops on intention, telling their story, branding, and marketing. And then they spent the last 3 weeks of their intensive goal setting and planning. And after their intensive, they received a $1,000 incubator grant to help them propel to the next level of their professional path. Next slide. Some observations from the program is that this is the only program of its kind offered specifically to the craft community in the United States. There are a lot of other programs throughout Europe that specifically also focus on craft artists and support craft artists in that way. Many more artists need support than we were able to provide. We did have 185 applications for just 12 spots, and we actually ended up opening it up to 13 total spots. Artists also need more money from incubator grants to create greater impact. So while the $1,000 incubator grant was great, we really felt like we needed to actually be able to offer artists more money so that they could realize their projects and actually bring them to completion. And also that artists need continued entrepreneurship and professional practice support. So I am happy to announce today that the American Craft Council received 3 more years of funding from the Wingate Charitable Foundation for this program, with the incubator accelerator grants being increased from $1,000 to $10,000 per artist. So this program will continue to support not only our current cohort of 13 with monthly check-ins, quarterly workshops, and one-on-one coaching calls, but as new cohorts will be launched each July, these new cohorts, and as they complete their 12-week intensive, they will join the past cohorts to continue to receive this ongoing support. Next slide. Another project that was funded by the NEA is Object As. It's a current project that is supporting craft artists and creating conversation around critical issues. The power of artistic objects can carry important cultural ideas is what drives this project. Objects can create new conversations. Objects speak to our current cultural, political, societal, environmental, and social climates. And objects can serve as a form of resistance, as commentary on today's world issues. So we reimagined or refashioned objects as idea carriers, as dialogue, rebellion, civic disruption, containers of truth, and objects that speak to the future. Next slide. So I worked with 6 curators to ask each of them to nominate an artist to make an object. And the 6 curators that I worked with across the United States are Sanjit Sethi from Minneapolis College of Art and Design, Andrew Blovout from Cranbrook Art Museum, Melanie Barnett from Black Artists and Designers Guild, Stuart Ashman from the International Folk Art Market, Suzanne Eiskin from Contemporary Craft, and Jennifer Nava Milliken from the Center for Art in Wood. Next slide. These 6 curators chose the following 6 artists: Leandro Gomez Quintero, who's a mixed media artist, Alex Anderson, who works in ceramics, Bukola Koki, who works in textiles, Ibi Barole, who works in sculpture, Morel Doucette, who works in mixed media, and James Morel, who works in wood, video, and sound. This is a cutting-edge group of craft artists that made amazing and impactful objects that will create some very interesting critical discourse. I'm not going to let you see the objects today, but you can look for them in our spring 2022 issue of the American Craft magazine to not only see the final objects, but to hear directly from the artist what their intention around the objects are. Next slide. Some important aspects of this project are that artists were paid to create their objects and they get to do what they wish with their objects. The American Craft Council does not own these objects. We do not own a collection, and we were not interested in obtaining or possessing these objects. So the idea of artists getting paid to make an object for a project was really kind of a unique and not often done activity. Artists are also being paid to write about their work in an object story for the spring 2022 issue of American Craft magazine. Curators were paid to write both an object story about their artist's object to be produced digitally in conjunction with the spring 2022 issue. And then we will also be launching 6 American Craft podcasts that are being produced by Sarah Rachel Brown of Perceived Value. These are the first podcasts of its kind for the American Craft Council. And then American Craft Council partnered with new craft and art organizations across the country, creating new strategic partnerships, because together we can truly support the field in the way it needs to be. Next slide. And Future Insight Talks is the third project, which of course we're in the middle of the last one, but they are allowing us to listen to craft communities and their needs, develop solutions, and innovate and implement new ideas for support. Each talk is focused on one of ACC's 4 pillars: the stewardship and legacy, the creative economies, and public voices for craft, with the 4th pillar of social impact and community being woven throughout each talk. Next slide. These talks are a place where we imagine the change of the future and reimagine crafts artists' new normal. They are interactive with the audience and initiate conversations around specific topics, allowing the craft community to both learn from others and ideate ways ACC and other craft-focused organizations can support makers as we strive to understand a post-pandemic world, create equity in the field, and understand the new craft economy. Next slide. The Artist Support Initiative will continue to strive to understand the changing nature of craft culture, material practice, evolving marketplaces, and creative entrepreneurship, creating new programs to serve and support the craft community. The Artist Support Initiative will apply new economic models, catalyze communities, and learn from each other and across sectors, and increase the value of skills and labor in the new economy. This initiative will pursue new models that value community, support social and economic equity, and drive creative economies. We will invest in new forms of and pursue new models of sustainability. Next slide, please. So what does this future support for artists look like, and what does the future hold? I'd like to share some observations that I've learned, including my time working both at the American Craft Council and my experience working with other craft organizations, engaging in conversations with artists and makers, and gaining an understanding of the craft community's current and future needs. My first observation is that creative entrepreneurship is necessary for the future of the craft economy. Today, more than ever, artists need to diversify their revenue streams in order to be resilient and sustainable in making a living. My second observation is that craft artists need to be seen as more than just object makers, but creative workers as well. Recently stated in Rolling Stone magazine, artists, cultural producers, facilitators, and entrepreneurs shared the bold, courageous capacity to navigate risk and to find an opportunity in the market and see the world in different ways. My next observation is that artists need more direct monetary support. We know that the creative workforce was one of the hardest hit sectors by the pandemic. And the United Nations said the impact investment was perhaps the best way to support communities of cultural entrepreneurs whose livelihoods have been jeopardized by the global health crisis. Another observation is that strategic partnerships are key to moving forward with greater impact and support. No one organization can provide all that is needed to help craft artists not only survive, but thrive. But together we can create a wonderful holistic support system for artists to succeed. Another observation is that marketplaces continue to evolve and change, and that the digital is here to stay. And that shows are more than just a retail place, but they're also a social spaces that are very important for artists to thrive and survive. And my last observation is that given the ability to experiment and pilot new programs and having freedom to learn from them is really the key to establishing great relevance and impact to the field, and also for the sustainability and the growth. Next slide. So my question, of course, is always about, can we creatives help rebuild and save the world? Again, to quote from Rolling Stone's article titled "Creative Power: How Cultural Entrepreneurship Can Shape a Post-COVID World." As development goals and COVID-19 recovery goals synergize, creators, artists, design-led organizations, and cultural entrepreneurs should play a leading role. Visualizing, planning, and managing complex projects are things that creatives do well. It will take grit and originality to design projects that dovetail with environmental, developmental, and social goals that can revitalize devastated communities of creators and cultural institutions worldwide. As with this new challenges that have arisen, creative solutions will be required, and the creative entrepreneur might actually hold an unexpected answer. Thank you. All right, I would next like to invite Caroline to start her camera, please. Great. So Caroline Tawau is the Director of Economic Opportunity at Springboard for the Arts. In 2018, she piloted a series of pop-up markets connecting creative entrepreneurs to new audiences, launched a panel and workshop series on access to capital for BIPOC artists, and in 2021 introduced Ready Made, a platform showcasing craft artists and makers across the state of Minnesota. Looking ahead to spring 2022, Caroline is excited to pull many threads together by piloting a market accelerator program connecting artists, crafters, and makers to more of the capital, tools, and resources they need to make a living and a life. Caroline's a creative writer and hand makes body butters from home in her spare time. So Caroline, welcome, and thank you for being here today.
Got unmute. Thank you, Gwen. Thanks for the introduction. Thanks for all of your planning and wrangling. I sent her my slide deck this afternoon, so thanks for your patience. And thanks to the American Craft Council for creating this generative and communal space for all of us to learn and grow and build together. I'm super excited to be here in the room with all of you, sharing some of Springboard's work, what we've been doing over the last 18 months, how we've changed our work in these times. And I'm so honored to be amongst my fellow panelists, taking lots of cues and notes from you all as you've been talking. So can't wait to dig in more. I'm learning from more of you during the breakout session. But with that said, I've got a bunch of slides, so let's jump in. All right, so Springboard for the Arts is an artist-run organization in Minnesota. Our headquarters are in St. Paul and Fergus Falls. Both of these locations are on land that was and is the home of the Ojibwe and Dakota people. Springboard's work considers art as meaning-making in everyday life, and that demands a very broad definition of who artists are. Next slide. So our work specifically prioritizes artists and communities who have not been resourced by the existing nonprofit art system. So that's artists who are Black, Indigenous, immigrant, and people of color. That also means for us, artists with disabilities, LGBTQIA+ artists, and artists in rural communities. Springboard is an organization characterized by things that other people see as contradictions, but we see as assets. So we are both urban and rural. We are intensely place-based and neighborhood focused, and national in our aspirations. And our work is both deeply practical and serves as a metaphor and vision for what's possible. Our vision is for a future where artists are essential in creating just and equitable local economies and human-centered systems. Next slide. So we frame our work around the idea that creativity and creative people are a natural resource and a source of energy and power for communities. Artists exist on every block and in every neighborhood, and they can be a tremendous source of power for addressing big challenges, building connections, and reorganizing and reimagining community expertise. But just like any other natural resource, we need systems that help us plug into that power. My ED, Laura Zabel, uses this analogy that I'll borrow because I think it's apt and captures our philosophy. And that is, if you live in a very sunny place, but don't have access to solar energy, or you won't have access to solar energy unless someone builds the solar panels. So Springboard in this analogy is the solar panel. The sun already exists, but we're just building the system to tend and connect and tap into that resource. Next slide. So what does that system actually look like? What does it look like to build an ecosystem of support for artists and creativity? Well, the last year, as Gwen mentioned, has proved that the need for the system and the lack of it in many places exists. The last year showed us the fragility of artists' lives and revealed to many people an emergency of inequity as artists and their communities were impacted by multiple crises. Artists were among the very first to lose their jobs and contracts as the bottom fell out at the beginning of the pandemic, And then more than a year later, the unemployment stats for artists are still heartbreaking. For some disciplines, the unemployment rate is still over 50%, and something close to 95% of artists report income loss. So with that, we went to work. We scaled our existing emergency relief fund program from a fund that typically supports 20 artists a year with $10,000 to raising over $1.5 million and supporting over 2,500 artists and culture bearers in our region. We wrote a guide and built a network, eventually helping over 100 locally based emergency relief funds also get up and running to provide critical stopgap help for artists to meet basic needs like paying rent, buying groceries. Next slide. We focused first on direct resources, so emergency relief, health and wellness support, but also we helped with navigating the unemployment and PPP systems that were not built for people who were patching together a living or cobbling together their incomes or kind of pulling together dozens of contracts. We advocated for and connected artists with city, county, and state small business relief programs. And we convened and coached and helped people move their work and businesses online. We published 2 new free handbooks, a new version of our longtime business skills handbook, and then a new handbook for artists working in community. Next slide, please. So because we knew that the crises, the compounded crises were going on, and that artists wanted and needed to go to work and help in their communities and using their creative skills to process people's grief and rage and hope and solace and connection. So based on our previous work, we created a new program called Artists Respond, first supporting Black artists in our neighborhood to paint murals and work with community in the immediate days after the murder of George Floyd by the Minneapolis police. Then supporting a group of artists statewide to design projects designed to combat social isolation, especially among our most vulnerable populations, and most recently supporting a group of rural artists of color to do projects that challenge our ideas of what and who rural is and who gets to tell the story of rural. We also relaunched our popular community supported arts program, a CSA that delivers art instead of vegetables, this year through the US Postal Service so people could connect directly with art experiences at home. All of these things are demonstrations, resources, and connection points that I'm really proud of that all were made possible throughout the last year. But none of these are long-term systems change. None of these are permanent solutions. Next slide, please. So we transitioned into imagining, well, what's next? What's systems changed? What's possible? How can we make our economy work for everyone, including artists? And what do artists actually need? And we discovered what we always knew: artists need the same thing as everyone else: healthcare, childcare, student loan help, renter protections, access to unrestricted capital, things that can only be accomplished through solidarity and collaboration with other movements and advocacy for policy change. Next slide, please. So last spring, we announced a new guaranteed income for artists pilot. This pilot is intentionally designed to align and partner with a network of pilots that are rolling out across the country through Mayor's Fair Guaranteed Income and other communities of practice. Our goal with this work is to support artists, of course, but most importantly, it's to ensure that we're included in the broader movement of economic justice, that artists can bring their skills and creativity to narrative change and visioning for the future for a better economy, and that they belong with everyone else as beneficiaries of any kind of public policy. Next slide, please. So looking still at our building support for local economies, in August, we launched a Rural Regenerator Fellowship from our Fergus Falls office. We actually recently celebrated our 10-year anniversary there. And the Rural Regenerator Fellowship expands on Springboard's work supporting and connecting creative rural leaders in the upper Midwest who are committed to strengthening their communities through art, culture, and creativity. Through this fellowship, we're able to award flexible funds to 11 folks who live and work in communities of 50,000 people or less across the upper Midwest. So that includes for us, Minnesota, North and South Dakota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Iowa, Illinois, and the Native nations that share these geographies. The inaugural cohort is an exciting mix of individual artists, makers, culture bearers, grassroots organizers, community development workers, public sector folks, and other rural change makers who will spend the next 2 years problem solving together on specific rural issues and building community collective knowledge on equitable post-pandemic relief and recovery. They'll ask questions about community care, land stewardship, and creative people power. So we're super excited to amplify their work and to learn alongside them what are the best ways to sustain and expand the impact of rural artists. Next slide, please. This is a slide or a picture of our current Creative Economy Fellows, which is a relaunch of a successful 3-year pilot program previously called the 2020 Artist Fellowship. So the program continues to provide unrestricted award dollars and recognize and resource artists across the state who identify as BIPOC and Native, working to build new models, systems, economic on-ramps, and pathways to opportunities in their communities. These fellows really embody our belief system that artists are essential in our communities, and their work builds in more engaged, vibrant, and just economies. Next slide, please. And then also this year, we launched the Creative Community Leadership Institute, calling it CCLI for short. It's an intensive in-person cohort-based training with real-world practice for artists, culture bearers, community organizers, development practitioners, and other thought leaders seeking to deepen their impact in the creative community building. So sessions center Native artists and communities and feature guest presenters and connection to local sites and leaders, and has a threefold focus, which is centering participants' individual passions and knowledge, sharing practical tools and techniques, and inspiring cross-sector ideas and connection. So in addition to learning together, participants will be supported in design and implementation of many pilot projects in their home base. Next slide, please. Our programs are new. Some of them are new, some of them are old and evolving, but we know that this work is not new for artists. Artists and culture bearers have been working to make their communities and neighborhoods and systems better, more connected, and more just for generations. So just like other small business owners and independent workers, artists often operate without a safety net and within systems that extract and devalue their labor. With our eyes firmly on dismantling these systems and rebuilding something better, we are trying to seed locally rooted ecosystems that support and sustain artists and culture bearers and their communities so that they can work on imagining and building a future that values individual and community needs, not only for safety and security and health, but also for meaning and connection and love. So thank you to all the artists continuing to do this work. Next slide, please. This is a photo of our space in St. Paul. It used to be a former used car dealership, the Ford Saxon dealership, for those who are familiar. So we reimagined and are reusing it as a hub at home for creativity and community. Next slide, please. This photo is circa pre-pandemic, and as soon as we could, we began animating the space and opening it up to artists to come and try things and inform what the space could be. One of the first things we tried was a series of pop-up markets. This particular one was geared towards holiday shoppers. So here you see our promo flyers for our very first series of in-person pop-up markets to support creative entrepreneurs, crafters, and makers in our community. Our St. Paul office is in a pedestrian transit restaurant heavy corridor on University Avenue on the border of Rondo and Frogtown. We really wanted to see if craft artists and makers could use our space to spark retail and commerce traffic and create a market for locally made crafts and goods. Next slide, please. This is an amazing artist, Suaw. She makes these really beautiful wearable mittens and then kind of more practical art, and as well as kind of home decor and other kind of water-based art. So she was at our all of our pop-up markets, and really taught us a lot about what it means, what craft artists needs. Next slide, please. This is also a vendor that we use a lot in our pop-up markets. Her brand is Bimpe Bada. She makes textiles, clothing, jewelry, home decor, all inspired by, derived from her West African culture. Next slide, please. And over the past summer, as construction kind of halted and started and stopped due to COVID, we decided to still activate our space and host a series of events called Saturdays at Springboard. And that included open air markets in partnership with neighborhood artists and organizations. Next slide, please. This is kind of a collage, but as you can see, there's some food truck events here, family-friendly art painting events, dance performances. We commission artists from the hip hop space to tag and graffiti our community hall, and then host a series of talks on hip hop's influence on arts and culture. All of those are really fun. Next slide, please. Here we commissioned more artists to help beautify our building. Like I said, it was an old used car dealership, and we really wanted to transform it into a creative hub. So here we wanted to reflect on the outside what's real and important to our community and neighbors and artists. Next slide, please. And again, another Saturday Springboard event, blessing and welcoming us into our new home as we open our doors and welcome others into the space. Next slide, please. And then of course, we're in a pandemic, so we're prioritizing and really digging into what it means to be stewards of community wellness through a series that we launched around health and wellness, hosted by artist practitioners over the summer on our front lawn. Next slide, please. This image is really special. Some of you may recognize it and may have been there because it's from our October grand opening. Finally, we did that. So we're super grateful for all the love and support we received by artists and community partners, and neighbors and family and friends and funders and our community of shareholders to help us get to this point. It was a really exciting day to see folks come in and kind of tour our space and have physical people in it. It's been a long process, exacerbated or extended by COVID. So we were happy to see the space used as we intended. Next slide, please. And there she is. If you remember the image before of the Ford dealership, here's what it looks like today. Truly a creative community hub from the outside in. And it's right off of the Green Line. So as soon as it's safe to do so, as soon as our doors are fully wide open, which will be in February, we do hope you come visit us. Next slide, please. So because of COVID, we couldn't launch into doing more of our pop-up markets and craft events like we dreamed of initially. So like everyone else, we pivoted online. And this is a new product that we just launched last month called Ready Made. Next slide, please. Ready Made is meant to reflect the amazing crafts and artists across the state who we couldn't host our in-person events for, but we really wanted to highlight, especially around the holiday mass shopping season. So we decided to put together somewhat of a gallery space where folks can peruse our site, learn and discover artists in Minnesota across the state, and shop from them directly. So this is not an e-commerce site. It's really just a gallery and a platform to showcase artists. But if as you click on each profile, on each image, you can go directly to that artist page or wherever they have an e-commerce site set up and shop directly their inventory and directly from them. Next slide, please. And here's just a closer look at the main landing page where we feature the makers in all different categories, including jewelry, textiles, makeup and skincare. The list is going and growing. So we designed it in this way to maximize social media's kind of scroll capacity and people's behavior, and also to keep interest and your attention on the page. So we're adding new makers every day, and we're excited to broaden our perception and aesthetic of what Minnesota craft arts look like. And next slide, please. And big announcement and shameless plug. We're bringing back an in-person market this holiday shopping season. So we're partnering with Third Daughter, Restless Daughter to host a last-minute gifts fair this Saturday at our St. Paul site. There's my ED, Laura Zabel, pictured wrapping gifts. She'll be reprising this role on Saturday. So I hope all of you in Minnesota can come by for some holiday fun and to pick up any last-minute gifts. And that's all from me. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Caroline. I appreciate it. As a fangirl of Springboard for the Arts for over a decade, it's great to have you at the conversation and to learn more about how you all pivoted and supported artists during kind of this most unusual last 22 months. So thank you for sharing that. That's great. All right, I'd like to invite Eric to please turn his camera on. There you are. So Eric Takashita is passionate about the power of art and culture to help build healthier, more equitable and sustainable communities. He is currently the principal of the Takashita Group and previously served as a senior fellow at Art Place America, a portfolio director for community creativity at the Bush Foundation, and director of creative placemaking at the Local Initiative Support Corporation. Eric has trained as a ceramic artist and lives in Minneapolis with his wife and daughters. And I personally work with Eric on an Americans for the Arts initiative, Creative Workers Working, which I'm sure he'll talk about a little bit as well. So Eric, thanks for being here today.
Well, thanks, Gwen, and thanks everybody for being here, and thanks to the American Craft Council. I actually just want to invite people, while you're not on the screen, but I just want to invite people to take a quick breath with me. Like a deep breath in and deep breath out. Maybe one more. I just want to acknowledge like what we've just heard, like from Caroline and from Gwen and from Leslie and from Marlene. Like this is amazing stuff that's going on all over the country. And I just want to kind of recognize that and pause for a second to really appreciate that, what they've all said. Again, I want to thank Gwen and the Craft Council and y'all for being here. And as Leslie said, I too think it's important to provide some context. So while I appreciate the introduction, I'll add to the introduction that I first and foremost see myself as the son of Wayne and Jean, the grandson of Nobutaro and Eleanor, the father to Malie and Kiana, and as Gwen mentioned, the husband to Denise. I'm a fourth generation Japanese American who does live here on the past, present, and future land of the people of the Osheti Sekoen, the Dakota people in Minneapolis, and I was trained as a Japanese artist, as a ceramic artist. I will say that I don't have any slides, so I apologize in advance for people that love PowerPoint. You're just gonna have to look at me. And for those that can't see me, I have kind of salt and pepper hair. I have glasses on today. I have a blue V-neck sweater, and I'm standing in front of a bookcase and some lovely art that's actually from the Springboard Community Support Art Program behind me. So that's kind of who I am. Just to start, I wanna, thanks for being here, but I don't know, right? I don't have any answers. So if you're looking for answers, I'm the wrong guy. But I will say that I love the questions that are being asked here today, right? Will creatives be part of the creative economy be moving forward? What will it look like? How will it be different? Will it be more equitable? I love these questions. And these are the questions I've been wrestling with for the last 20 or so years. So I just have a few remarks. I'm going to put them in 3 buckets. First, a few assumptions, then a couple observations, and then finally some thoughts on how we can center and advance equity in our work. So first, the assumptions. So number one, I just want to start with saying that I believe the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result, right? And that the systems we have are designed exquisitely to get the results we're getting. So what that means is we have to actually think differently, and we have to build new systems, just as Caroline was talking about, to actually get different results in the future. So that's my first assumption. Second assumption, that, you know, in honor of Spider-Man coming out tomorrow, that with great power comes great responsibility. And you all, as artists and craft people, have incredible power, right? As artists, what do? We imagine things that don't yet exist and we manifest them. We literally change the world. We create things that didn't exist before. So I want to just pose that I think a key part of this conversation is, how do we start to claim and use our power, right? I think that's a critical part, this idea of, as Gwen mentioned the Rolling Stone article about kind of navigating risk and seizing opportunity. That's what artists do, right? We manifest things that don't exist. So how do we use and claim our power? So that's the second assumption. I think artists need to do that. My third assumption is that we are the ones we've been waiting for. right? So if we want different outcomes, we need to think differently, think bigger. We need to be building new systems. And I think that artists, because of that amazing power that we have to do it. We're the ones that we've been waiting for. If we want to see something change, we've got to do it, right? So we can't sit around passively waiting for somebody to ask us. We have to assert ourselves. We have to claim our power. We have to see ourselves, and we have to be leaders in our communities. So those are my 3 assumptions I want to kind of start and frame my remarks with. Number 1. So then specifically on the creative economy, I'll just speak briefly to that. So just a couple things. One is, and many of you already do this, so I acknowledge this, but I just want to, in the spirit of stating obvious, artists are businesses. Right? You are a small business person. Right? You have a product that you sell in a marketplace. There are people you sell it to. There's an economic model that's behind it, right? And so this idea of somehow artists are not part of the creative economy doesn't make sense to me. Of course we are. We are businesses, and we have to see ourselves as businesses, and we have to act as if we're part of that. We are part of the economy. We're a critical part of the economy in terms of adding revenues and having goods and services and products that are in the marketplace, right? So I just want to encourage us to think about, how are we showing up? How are we showing up? How do we see ourselves? And then how do we show up at the Chamber of Commerce? How do we show up in our small business association? How do I participate in things that are offered by universities or colleges or by the Small Business Administration? Right? We're businesses. So of course, artists are part of the creative economy. We have to see ourselves as that, and we need to assert ourselves as part of the economy. So thing 1. Thing 2 on the creative economy is that the folks that have spoken before are just doing amazing things, right? To both kind of reimagine existing infrastructure, kind of like Textile Arts LA that Leslie was talking about, or the work that Gwen mentioned that's happening at the Craft Council and elsewhere. Hooray, kudos, applaud. Applause. And then the work to build new infrastructure, right? The work that Melanie is doing with the Black Artists Guild, the work that Caroline's doing with Springboard. I mean, it's critical, right? So we absolutely need to think about, how do we have this infrastructure within the arts community to support artists as part of the creative economy. And I give kudos to those that are doing that. Number 2. But number 3 is, I also think we have to think beyond the arts. And Caroline started to talk about this a little bit, but there's like an entire infrastructure out there that's designed to support small businesses and entrepreneurs that sometimes we think about and oftentimes we don't. And I've kind of alluded to it, but folks like the Small Business Administration, entrepreneurial centers at universities, the USDA if you live in rural communities, Main Street programs, community development financial institutions, other kind of community development corporations. There are ton of infrastructure that exists out there to support small businesses, to support entrepreneurs, that I think artists need to really find and get involved with and tap into and maximize. If we're going to get where we need to go as artists, as leaders in our communities, and really assert ourselves as part of the creative economy, we have to figure out how to hack into these other systems. Now, importantly, I want to acknowledge and recognize that many of these systems aren't necessarily set up to support artists or creatives, right? Oh, how interesting. So then we need to show up and we need to help them. We need to change those systems. We need, again, to be the leaders that we've been waiting for, such that we can start to have those systems be more responsive to the needs of all folks, including artists and creatives. So that's the 3rd point. And then the final point I want to talk about the creative economy a little bit is the thing that Gwen just mentioned, in terms of, I've had the good opportunity to work with Gwen with the Put Creative Workers to Work, which is this, in response to the pandemic, a group of folks kind of came together last year and said, hey, you know what? We have this kind of health crisis, number 1, but we have obviously the economic crisis that Caroline mentioned, and obviously the civic unrest that then followed. And as we think about responding to that, what will that public intervention be? And so the Getting Creative Workers Working Coalition, which we would invite all of you to participate, and thank you, Gwen, for putting that in the chat. It's a group of folks that have come together to really think about, well, what are the federal policies and the federal investments that are being made that can support artists and creative workers and really helping to get them back to work? As Caroline alluded to, there's kind of different stages, right? There was kind of the immediate, like, hey, people need immediate relief, like the emergency relief fund that Springboard was doing. Artists are also critical as part of the recovery effort, right? And so we're kind of in this phase now, like, how do we think about recovery and the American Rescue Plan? And there's a bunch of dollars that are coming down from the federal government, trillions of dollars, literally, that artists can and should figure out how to tap into. So we need to then start to, again, build these muscles and these relationships within these other systems to be able to access those funds, number 2. And then number 3 is, again, as Caroline mentioned, there's like all this new kind of infrastructure. How do we actually build a safety net so when the next, not if, but when the next COVID-like pandemic thing, when the next Great Recession thing, when the next fill in the blank thing happens, that we actually have a system that is better able to respond and support all people within our society, including and especially artists and creatives. So just to mention the Getting Creative Workers Working, you're welcome to participate in it. We have a network call monthly on the third Thursdays, and so folks are welcome to join us if you're interested and able. So I think there's a couple different things on the creative economy, right? Just number one, that we have to see ourselves as businesses first. Number two is that, there's a lot of great ways that we can kind of repurpose or help evolve existing infrastructure within the arts to better support artists as businesses and part of the creative economy. Number two. Number three, we have to start to think about what is the existing infrastructure out there that maybe is not specifically for artists, but is part of the economic development infrastructure that artists should and can access and use. And finally, four, how do we start to build these new systems and really encourage, advocate for, and build new mechanisms by which artists are benefiting from some of the public investment that is currently coming down the road. So 4 observations on the creative economy. And then finally, I'll just talk briefly on equity because it's a core part of me, my work, and my value system. And so just to name, part of this idea of will the creative economy be more equitable, and it's going to really depend on us, right? Again, we are the ones we've been waiting for. But if it's going to be more equitable, I'm going to offer 3 things. One is that in general, I think that, artists and creators, we just need to let more folks in. We need to create a bigger tent, right? So I love Gwen's definition that the Craft Council uses around, craft is skilled making on a human scale. And what I'll say is that, I think we need to kind of continually work to get out of our own way, right? And not hold art so precious, is my personal opinion. Right? We need to have more people see themselves as artists, kind of as Caroline was talking about, that expansive definitions of who gets to call themselves an artist and be a creative worker. I think that there's oftentimes a fear to do that, right? There's a fear that I've seen and I've chatted with folks about, because if somehow we let more people see themselves as artists, we're worried that it might diminish the value and all the hard work and effort that I put into mastering my craft, mastering my artistic work. And I would suggest to folks it's actually the opposite of that, right? The more people try to do what y'all are doing, the more they realize, oh man, that's like amazing what they do, because here's what I can do as a layperson, right? And I think it actually has this kind of opposite effect where people have a greater appreciation, right? And Caroline talked about Laura Zabel, who I also know, and Laura talks about how in sports, for example, like I own golf clubs, right? So like I go out and I golf, and then I watch like golf pros golf, and it's like, oh right, like this is they make it look easy, and this is like really hard. So by actually having more people do this and participate, we actually enhance the value of professional artists and folks that are making a living and the master craftsmen. So number one, I think we just to advance equity, number one, we need to invite more people into the tent, let more people see themselves as artists. So number one. Number two is I think this idea that I want to assert that there is no such thing as an art desert, right? That art is happening everywhere, and that we need to really recognize that it's a human impulse. It's something that folks are doing, but that the systems aren't always equitable, right? So we need to expand kind of our definitions of who gets to be included, what kind of art and craft is going to be supported, and we need to include other geographies, right? We need to think differently about geographically remote places, rural places. We need to think differently about Indian country. We need to think differently about like who gets included, right? So I love the work that's been talked about today that Badge is doing and Springboard's doing to really advance Black folks, Indigenous folks, other folks of color. Again, it goes back to this idea of if we want to do something, if we want different results, we need different systems, and we need to think differently about it. So I'm going to encourage us, if we really want the creative economy to be more equitable, we have to do that. We have to build those systems. We need to include more people. So in closing, will the creative economy look different? Will creatives be a part of it? Will it be more equitable? I don't know. I really don't know. But what I will suggest to you is that it's going to be up to us. If we want to create a different future, we need to do things differently, and that we are the ones we've been waiting for. Artists can, and I believe must, be leaders in this work, right? You all. Because artists create things that don't yet exist, and they make them a reality. Thank you.
Eric, that was wonderful. What a great closer you are. I would like to invite all the presenters to please turn on their cameras. We're going to move into a little bit of a group conversation before we go into breakout rooms. And of course, the sunshine is a thing in my window, as it always is this time of the Wednesdays of the talk. So I apologize for that. So, Eric, I actually really want to play off of the way you closed out and talked about how the creative economy moves forward and it becomes more equitable is about reinventing systems. So does anybody have some thoughts on what some of those systems might look like or what they might be, or if you feel you are already working on some of those systems, would you like to share with the group? And feel free to just unmute and speak up, or I can call in if you raise your hand. Yeah, Leslie, go ahead.
I'll throw myself out there. I think to some extent, a new creative economy is inevitable, because I think it's going to be a response to, so before the pandemic, 40% of Americans apparently were already engaged in a gig economy. And to Eric's point, like, we are all artists, right? How are we defining this word? But a gig economy is essentially me seeing myself as a person with a skill set that I then go and apply in the environment or the time or the place in which it's needed. That's creativity, right? And so I think that we're going to, okay. And then if we talk about this whole great resignation, I think that more of us are going to be demanding meaningful work, looking for ways to have more flexible time, and looking for ways that we can bring forth our humanity, and that's by definition a creative economy. So I think we're on the cusp of living into the inevitability of that.
That's great. Anybody else have some thoughts on that? I think I want to go back, Eric, to the work we do about put creative workers to work, and this idea of policy change, right? Is that, that's probably one of the most effective places where systems can be affected and changed is under policy change at the particularly federal level, moving on down all the way to the local level. But will you talk a little bit about the work that has been done at the Put Creative Workers to Work? Because it's not just about creating places for artists to make their art, but it's actually really incorporating creative workers into everyday aspects of working as well, right?
Yeah. Thanks, Gwen. Yeah, a couple of things I'll comment on. So number one is, as I mentioned, the getting creative workers to work thing has been about a 20-month effort so far, 18-month effort so far. One of the things that we did was actually we built from the coalition a policy platform that's on the website that actually says, hey, as we reimagine the future, here are things that artists need, right, to actually help support their work in all kinds of different ways. And so, and that was generated by the field. So I think that's one. And so we've started to try to help socialize, if you will, or kind of include, or, at least not disallow things that would support artists and creatives in federal policy. So that's one thing that I think is critically important as a policy thing. I think the other thing is to really start to figure out, decode some of these systems to figure out, hey, if there's $1 trillion coming down the pike, where is all that money, right? And is it going to be in the Department of Labor, or is it going to be in the Department of Education, or is it going to be where, or is it going to be through workforce, and whatever? And trying to figure out these points of translation, because it's fine to get federal policies done, but at the end of the day, we need to get money in the hand of artists, right? And so part of this coalition's work is really to help do some of that decoding, the translating part of it, to say, hey, here's this federal policy and we need to work on that, we need to advocate for that, but then that money is going to go to state and local agencies. So how do you start to build relationships with those state and local agencies, and how do you help them understand that this is something that can be done, and then how does that then translate into getting the dollars actually into the hands of artists and creative workers? So it's kind of that entire spectrum, if you will, of how the dollars are flowing. And another last thing I'll say about the coalition that I think is important is that it is a national group. So we're able then to do exactly like this, kind of have these national peer learning conversations where folks are saying, oh, hey, here's what I'm doing in Illinois, and here's what we could do in South Carolina, or here's what's happening in the Bay Area that we could then do in Memphis, right? So just as examples, that I think that's been another really powerful part of that work that's been happening.
Can I
Yeah,
add?
go ahead, Melanie. Yeah.
Well, to address some of the equitable questions, one of the things that we're starting to see more, having more transparency around fees and asking for, asking to be paid, and paying what we're asked our worth. I think that's a really big thing that's happening. I know amongst our members is they're starting to feel more confident on asking for what they feel they're worth, and also learning about what the fees have been. And they're also able to see the gap that has been created on how much they've been missing out. And so people have been raising, increasing their fees to try to help to, create that equitable system. Because I think, especially when it comes to design, even in art, I think they go hand in hand. We have no idea what people are getting paid, how much this costs, blah, blah, blah. So I think that's one of the ways that we could start to create that equity, is that we need more transparency.
Can I chime in too? Because I really like that point.
Yes.
Yeah, I think there's definitely been a lack of transparency. You got another speaker. Hang on. All right.
That's the beauty of Zoom from home, is that we get to see kids, animals. I'm calls like this all the time. So no worries, and welcome. What's his name?
Lucky.
All right, welcome, Lucky.
My little terror.
He's cute.
Yeah, I like the point about transparency, because I think what the last 18 months has taught us is, artists don't have a safety net. And part of what we can do to kind of build one is talk about money, talk about costs, talk about budgets, talk about pricing. I think there's been a little bit of secrecy, because we're all kind of capitalism, we're trying to all kind of, get the most out of our opportunities. But I think that's creating a lot of inopportunities. So I think the pandemic has taught us solidarity, some unity, some transparency is important, but moving away from the individual artist responsibility and thinking, I guess to Eric's point, thinking about the creative economy as a creative workforce. Like, how are we talking about ourselves as a workforce? So when we're thinking about policy or money coming down or big agenda, we can advocate better as a body, as a collective. And I think so much of the arts has been preserved and is considered very precious. And again, the pandemic has taught us that a lot of artists, completely fell out. There was no bottom underneath a lot of us. And I think there's a lesson there for us in how it's not about the excellence, but it's really about the community and the collective power. So how are we using our collective power to advocate, as a workforce, as a body of people that are economic drivers? I mean, artists bring a lot of money into our communities, and they pay other artists. So how can we funnel and move some of that money more into artists' hands, because we know that that's where it circulates, and also that's how we can keep our artist communities healthy and vibrant. And beyond our artist communities, our entire communities, to Eric's point, artists are everywhere. Artists are part of the fabric of all of our civic activities. So if we recognize that, and then look to how we can work in solidarity and in community and partnership with each other, I think this moves away from the individual's responsibility. Yes, there is some, but I think it helps us move into more of bigger thinking, and then hopefully greater shifts in our sense of what equity could look like on a collective level.
That's a great point. So Leslie, did you have something you want to chime in on?
Thanks, Gwen, because I see Eric wants to jump too.
Yeah, that's good.
This idea of transparency, I think, is so powerful, because and then to Eric's point about thinking about what gets funded and then how that money trickles down, because number one, I think a lot of us have a twisted sense of what value is, because we forget that we're subsidizing the cost of the grocery store, for instance, through our tax dollars, and then we're complaining about the price of the farmer's market. or we're presuming that everybody else is making so much money. And there are actually two tracks that are happening. One is like the fact in Los Angeles, if you get hired to be the executive director of an arts organization, most of the time you don't even get paid enough money to rent a 1-bedroom apartment. And then the other track is who's taking those jobs, right? It's people who are already coming from money. So that the more that we talk about money, the more that we begin to see how rigged the game is and how we can talk about change. And then also the fact that those of us who are building community platforms recognize the leveraged opportunity, right? And I'm sure Melanie can speak to this with the like the group at the art show, but that relatively small number of people each giving you a small amount of money, buying your good or whatnot, aggregates to a nice amount of money. So that's another track of, if you're not in a position to be accessing large grants or funding, there's the hyper local and the doubling down on the intimacy.
That's great. Thanks for sharing. Eric, did you have more you wanted to add in there?
Well, I was just, I don't know. Yes, I was going to say something. I wanted to go back, though, just as Caroline, you were talking about this idea of the solidarity economy, just to tie back to what Leslie was saying about gig workers, right? I mean, and just to acknowledge, like, artists are businesses, artists are gig workers. And I think the more that we can find those natural allies and partners and be working with them collectively to change these systems, that's where I think we're going to find success. And in fact, I would suggest it's the only way we're going to find success, number one. And number two is, I also just want to acknowledge, like, a lot of the systems we currently have and take for granted, Social Security, unemployment, whatever, these are all things that were created, most of them in the 20th century, right? And so they're designed to meet the 20th century workforce needs. And so as we go into the 21st century, I think we have to, again, imagine what are the current needs? What is the nature of work in the 21st century? And I think, again, artists are an example of this, right? As Caroline said, artists bore the brunt of this. We were on the front lines of who lost work, who still hasn't recovered, who is most at risk. And, oh, by the way, artists were the very ones that people were holding up during the beginning of the pandemic. The singing on the balconies, right? The playing the music, or the painting the sidewalks, or whatever it may be. Like, it's critical to our community, and I think that more than ever we see the need and the value for artists. So you combine the fact that people start to see, oh yeah, artists are actually important to our well-being. Oh, and by the way, if we kind of invoke bell hooks, we need to center on the margin idea, like, they're the most on the margin, particularly rural communities and BIPOC folks, then let's make systems work for those people that are most on the margin, and then it will work for everybody else. Okay, get off my soapbox. Thanks.
Yeah, no, I love it. It's great. I know we could probably keep conversation going, but I do want to give us an opportunity to go into the breakout room so that we can give the attendees a moment to also have a conversation with each of us. So I would like to move into those breakout rooms now, please, Jason. And for those of you who are attendees, this is an option for you. If you don't want to move into the breakout room, just don't accept the invite that pops up onto your screen. We'll spend 20 minutes inside the breakout room, where each breakout room will have its own unique conversation. And like I said earlier, we are capturing the notes and overarching themes and ideas that are happening in there. And then we'll come back together after that 20 minutes and kind of just check in with each of the presenters to see if there were some major like themes or ideas that are expressed in your conversation in your breakout rooms that you want to share with the greater group. So Jason, whenever you're ready, we'd love to move into those breakout rooms, please. Wonderful. See you on a little bit. All right. Well, I hope you all had a nice, lively conversation in your breakout rooms like I did. And I would also love to invite the presenters to be spotlighted back on the screen when possible. And just want to check in and see what kind of conversations you all had in your breakout rooms, and if there was any themes or ideas that were shared that you'd want to share with the rest of the group.
Well,
Oops.
oh,
Go ahead.
you go ahead, Caroline. You want to go?
My group talked a lot about that artists do a lot. I mean, artists make the things, but then have to figure out how to market the thing, price the thing, build an audience around the thing, sell the thing. So I think we talked about what that feels like and how it's so much more complicated than people might realize or acknowledge. And what are some of the ways that we can take some of that pressure, provide some more support systems around artists. So especially for solopreneurs, artistpreneurs, folks that do a lot by themselves, how can we create a community of support around them? And then some of the other things we discussed were the business side. So when to know when to hire and when to know where to seek counsel, right? Legal counsel, accounting counsel. How do you grow your business in a way that feels to scale and sizable and manageable? So some of those business side of things can be handed off. So when do you do that and how do you do that? And how do you circumvent having to go to business school? And what are some of the resources that folks can get and use easily? And then I think the other lesson that folks said they learned over the pandemic was how important it was to stay connected to other artists, to stay in your communities and to stay plugged in. So that's what we talked about. It's really rich. I'm sorry if I missed anything, but really great group. So thanks.
That's great. Wonderful. Thanks for sharing, Caroline. Melanie, do you want to share?
Yeah, I thought the theme of talking about taking back our power as creatives and realizing that we have the power to create our own tribes and really nurture the group that we could create through our art. We talked about the importance of storytelling and then also the importance of having the marketing and business support as a creative and thinking about that, I was looking at this time for artists as a time where we were being seen in a different way because we had time to make. And then there were people who could support us who were, home working still and still getting paid. And so they had more money to spend. But as an artist, we have to be prepared for that and thinking about how that use this time to reevaluate your business model and think about that you, as a creative, you get to make the rules and decide. Create the line. We always talk about the line or the product that we really don't like, what people want to buy. But I was saying, like, let's look at this. Let's change the language around that. And so if that cup that you make is going to say pay the rent, set up a system so that cup could pay the rent. So then you could work on the other projects that you really love to do. It's okay, because remember, all objects are coming from you anyway. It's your vision. It's about how you want to tell the story. So it was really about taking ownership of your craft, your story, and your business, and looking for a American Craft Council to support that from the marketing and business perspective.
Yeah, that's great. Any other themes or ideas that were discussed in breakout rooms anyone wants to share? Eric.
So I'll just plus one that, right? This idea of how do we create communities of support, how do we take back our power, and particularly in the context of how do we start to navigate systems that really weren't set up to support us, right? Whether it's be as Black folks, as rural folks, as artists and creatives in things like the Small Business Administration Network. And so we need to kind of assert that, and we need to not just do it by ourselves, but we need to find kind of our tribe, right? To borrow from let's build our tribe and let's find other folks that are like-minded and really support each other in solidarity.
Yeah, absolutely, great idea. And I'm putting in the chat, so kind of to expand just briefly on what Eric was talking about is seeing yourself as an artist, as a business, resources that are outside of the arts community that you all may not know about. So he mentioned CDFIs, which are community development financial institutions. I actually work for one here in Asheville. We do have a very specific sector focus on craft in Western North Carolina. But CDFIs were developed in the Clinton administration, and their whole purpose was to provide lending to small businesses from marginalized communities that often were not able to secure funding from traditional banking institutions. And we could have a whole nother hour conversation about the racism and the systems inside financial institutions that prevent equity and access to lending capital, but that's what the CDFIs are about. There's 1,300 of them across the United States. If you don't, thanks, Eric. He's put in the Mountain Biz Works, that's where I work, website. So I appreciate you giving them a plug. But, you know, if you don't know about one, there will be one in your area that covers your area. So the Opportunity Finance Network, it has a website where you can go to and you can put in your where you live and find out what CDFIs actually serve you. Some others as the Small Business Association. Also on different college university campuses, there's always going to be either a small business center or an SPTDC, which is a Small Business Technology Development Center. They're there to offer free support for anyone who's trying to get their business off the ground or to learn. There's a lot of basic, wonderful classes that are offered there. There's entrepreneurship centers also that are often can be found on college campuses, and community colleges in general often teach a lot of wonderful kind of business focused classes. So like Caroline, you were talking about in your room, people want to know how can they get that business support without having to go get their MBA, right? Like you can find that support. It is available. There's also, I didn't even think about this, but there's an organization called SCORE that helps you with financial. That's really about mentors and volunteers across the United States that have financial expertise that volunteer to support small businesses in getting their financials and learning about financial best practices when running your business. So there is a lot of support out there for small businesses that can translate into the arts community. You just need to be aware of that. So I just kind of wanted to bring that out there for you all to become aware. In our group, we talked also about the intergenerational challenges where, you know, like younger people who are very comfortable with social media, they may have been able to pivot to more using social media and online websites for sales and e-commerce sales, where older generations that may not be as technically comfortable had more challenges. And then what would it look like if you created more intergenerational programs where you're bringing those intergenerations of artists together to really have conversations, to learn from each other, and then to support each other as well, kind of like in a cohort type of atmosphere, which I thought was kind of fascinating to think about. And then thinking about not just our little pocket of United States, right, but also, you know, across the world. So like Diana in our room does a lot of work, you know, across. So she splits her time both here in the United States and I think in Senegal. And she was talking about an artist she knows in Norway who's also working in Zambia. So thinking about like, what are the programs that exist or are interesting communities that exist out there to create a global support system, not just one within the United States. So yeah, absolutely. It was a very interesting conversation in our room. How about you, Leslie? Did you have some interesting conversations in your breakout room?
Yes, and huge thanks to everyone who was in that breakout room. It was very, it was emotional and revealing. I will say, and to use Eric's expression on a +1, we talked a lot about agency and the idea that in fact, all of us in different language used that same kind of concept. And coincidentally, everyone in that room had created or was an integral part of some sort of a platform that then was leveraged for community building and economic opportunity in whatever their particular genre was. So that was just encouraging that we're not powerless. We talked about that for a bit. We also talked a little bit about remembering that with things like social media and Instagram in particular, to have a little grain of salt if you presume that everyone else on there is somehow hitting it out of the park and that you're still struggling. You know, don't forget, a lot of that's just marketing. As a marketing person, I will confess that right now. You know, so just take a breath and play your own game there. And then the third thing, we actually had a beautiful conversation about indigeneity and where we're from, and our obligation to ourselves and to each other, that when we have to give, and when we need to ask.
That's great. That's wonderful. And my last thought is that, Eric, I have to say that you are very kind of that inspirational, kind of speaking from the pulpit kind of individual. So I think a few of us would like to nominate you to be our spokesperson for the creative community. And we'll follow you, you lead us. But thank you for that. You inspired people in my room to be excited again, to connect to the creative community, to connect to each other. And so thank you for that. Melanie, what you're doing with the Black Artists and Designers Guild, with your own personal work, the Obsidian House, that just was so powerful and amazing to see. And so thank you for that work. And I'm looking forward to seeing how that continues. Caroline, Springboard for the Arts. When I was the director of an economic development organization that grew economies through craft in small towns of West North Carolina, we used your CSA program, your art train program, your work of art handbook, all of the resources that you offer at Springboard for the Arts is just full of generosity and knowledge and expertise, and it's just amazing. And if you all as artists or people who work in the arts or community have not accessed that website, you should absolutely 100% do that, because they have a lot of free resources and inexpensive resources that you can take advantage of, that I'm constantly stalking and looking and using myself. So thank you for that. And then Leslie, what you're doing with the Textile Arts LA, the idea of a fiber shed, which we didn't even really go into, but this idea of a circular economy inside, a radius, and what you're trying to do to empower textile artists in the LA area and help them build economies is just phenomenal. And so, I just want to thank each of you for being supportive and subject matter experts in your area. The work that you've done, I want to recognize that, because I know you're all probably exhausted of supporting the artists in a time of crisis. And so, I'm just blown away. And I know the attendees in my breakout room are also blown away by just the phenomenal work that each of you are doing and each of your organizations are doing. So thank you for that. Thank you to the attendees for participating and being here. Those of you who were with us for all three talks, I hope you enjoyed the journey. I can't believe it's ending, but I'm sure there'll be some revitalization of these conversations in the new year. I hope everybody enjoys their holiday season, or has enjoyed it if it's already over for you, depending kind of on your belief systems and your culture and your community. But thank you everyone for being here today. Just so excited about initiating and starting these conversations and being privileged enough to be part of it, which is just kind of something that I pinch myself every day for. So thank you for that. And with that, I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their day/evening, depending on where you are in the world in the United States. And if you guest presenters want to hang on for a little bit after everybody leaves, if you're able to, I'd just love to do a little kind of debrief. But thank you all so much.